Alright, so before we start any projects, I just want to introduce you to the HTML5 boilerplate. And you may have already used it before, but what it is it's basically an HTML5 framework. It gives you the files and folders that you need to kind of give you a starting point. So what we want to do is go to the website, and the URL is, I believe, is HTML boilerplate.com, I believe, or not. Alright, let me just search for it. Okay, so I must have forgot. Oh, I forgot the 5. So it's HTML5 boilerplate.com. Alright, so I would highly suggest going here and going through the documentation and maybe watch this introduction video. But it's pretty easy to understand. It just gives you a shell or a starting point, and if you click download here, you're going to get the entire package, which is kind of large. So what we want to do is click on get a custom build, and that takes us to this initializer.com website and kind of gives us some options. Alright, so as a pre-configuration we have 3 different options. We have classic, which is basically just the bare bones, the needed stuff, and then we have a responsive option for apps or websites that are all about mobile. Alright, so mobile first websites, and we can make the classic responsive just as well, or we could use the Bootstrap framework. Alright, so what we're going to do is just choose the classic, and then down here we have some options. CSS template, we can use Twitter Bootstrap, or like I said, mobile first, responsive. We're just going to keep no template checked. Here we have Modernizer checked. Modernizer is a JavaScript library that can it'll test to see if your browser can handle some of the HTML5 features like geolocation, things like that. And then you can actually create conditionals, and you can make something happen if, say, the browser can't use geolocation. Then you can have it do something else, maybe display a message or whatever. So that's good to have. jQuery we want to include. We're going to just use the minified version. Down here we don't need most of these, i.e. classes, this old browser warning. You can actually, this is really good for a production site, Google Analytics, but we don't need that. .htaccess file, a favicon, yeah, we don't need any of these. Robots.txt, you can actually specify certain pages that you don't want indexed in search engines. Humans.txt, we don't need. A custom 404 page if you want, and Adobe cross domain, so we don't need any of these. So very minified version. Let's go ahead and download it. Alright, so it comes as a zip package. If we open that up, we have an initializer folder, and then we have our structure. Alright, so I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to call it HTML5 site, and let's just drag all these over. Alright, so here is a shell. We didn't have to create these folders and files. Alright, so we have our index page, we have our JavaScript folder, which has the main JavaScript file, which should be empty. Okay, so we also have a vendor folder, which has basically our third-party services, jQuery, Modernizer. Alright, so we don't touch these. We have an images folder, which is empty, CSS, which has a main.css file as well as normalized files, and these are basically like resets. Alright, so it sets everything, sets padding and margin to 0, things like that, which is good to have. Alright, so the body and everything is set to 0, so we won't have to touch this. You don't even have to use it, but I always use some kind of reset, so we'll just keep that. And that's really it. So let's open up the index.html file. I'm going to use Notepad++. Of course, you can use any editor that you prefer. And then we just have a shell. All right, so we can actually just start developing now instead of having to write out all the head HTML tags, the meta tags, all that. All right, so let's just go through this real quick. We have the doc type, which is very short for HTML5. We have our HTML tag, and they have this class of Node.js, and that just deals with with browsers that don't have JavaScript enabled, which there aren't too many. Most people have JavaScript enabled, so you don't even need that really. We'll just keep it there, but you can just as well get rid of it for this, at least for this series. So then we have our head tag, we have our meta tags, character set, which is UTF-8. We have let's see, our viewport. All right, so this is needed for if you want the site or the app to look good on mobile devices. You want to set the width to the device width. And then we have links to our style sheets, our normalized CSS file, and then our main CSS. And this is the one that we'll be working in, all right, or that we would be working in. And then we have a link to Modernizer, and then we have some scripts down here, jQuery, our main JS file, and that's pretty much it. I mean, we have a paragraph in the body. That's really it. All right, so it doesn't provide you any kind of design or layout. It's just a starting point. Now, before we when we move to the next project, we're going to build just a really simple blog using HTML5, and it's not going to have any kind of back-end functionality or anything. We're basically just going to design the front end of a blog. All right. So before we do that, I just wanted to just display a little bit of HTML5 markup just to get started. And then in the next chapter, we'll look at CSS, pretty much just the basics of CSS, and then JavaScript. And then we'll be done with this chapter, and we can get to our project. So basically, we just have a paragraph, all right, in our body. Let's get rid of that, and let's create a header. All right, so in HTML5, we can use these header tags. All right, now in the past, we probably would have had something like div ID equals header. All right, and then a closing div, and that would be our header. But now with HTML5, we can use just the header tag, and you can actually grab this in CSS. You can grab it in jQuery or JavaScript, and we don't even need a class or an ID or anything like that. Some people do still use an ID, even if this is the only header in the page. You may want to say header equals ID equals header. You could do that, which looks a little funny to me. I would probably prefer something like header with the ID of main, so you know that's the main header. All right, and then in here we can put, let's say, an h1 tag. Let's say my HTML5 website. Whoop. All right, and then if we save that, obviously we're just going to see this h1 tag. All right. Under the header, we could have our navigation, which can be represented with the nav tag. All right, so that would be our navigation. Inside here, we'd have an unordered list. Alright, so that would be our navigation, and then under that we could actually split this. We could say an article, and then we could have a sidebar on the side of the article, and for that we would use the a side tag. Alright, and then inside of the article we could have maybe another header. Okay, so a header doesn't need to mean the top of your website. It can mean the header of an article as well. Alright, so we'd have that, and then we could have a section. Alright, and then let's see, after the article and sidebar. We could have a footer. Alright, so I mean, you can do it how you want. This is just one example. You could have maybe a list of blog posts, so there'd be multiple articles, and you can have some div tags, but you can see that if for a very basic structure we don't even need div tags. Alright, and these are much more descriptive than having a bunch of IDs and classes. And not only is that make cleaner code, but it also makes it easier for the search engines to know what is on your page and how it's structured, and it just makes for a clean website. So in the next video, I just want to have kind of a CSS refresher. It really helps if you already have a foundation and you know at least the basics of CSS. I think you'll have an easier time with this course. And then after that, we'll do a JavaScript refresher, because in order to use a lot of the different HTML5 dynamic features, you need to also use JavaScript. Alright, and then after that, we'll start our first project, which will be a blog or the front end of a blog, and then we'll go from there.